Hello, welcome to another show of the Research to Reps Roundtable. I am your co-host, Dr. Coach Pat Ivey, and with me is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ted Lambrinides. Ted, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Pat. Looking forward to Dr. Turner's discussion with us today. Should be great.
I can't wait. I can't wait. And before we get there, maybe we should bring Dr. Ernie Reimer in. Ernie, what's happening?
Not much. After this podcast, I have a men's baseball game tonight, so I'm hoping that we can keep this clean and crisp, and then I can go and get warmed up and try to hit for the fences. But before we get to that, we have a esteemed colleague, Dr. Craig Turner, with us, who comes by way through mutual connections. Craig, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. It's great to see you all again.
Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, getting into it, chop it up, talk some shop. It's been a few years since I've seen Ted, so this is an exciting conversation. But yeah, I'm ready.
I'm wondering, first question, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, why do you do what you do, all of those things.
So originally from Oldham, England, which is a small town outside of Manchester. So normally for my American colleagues, I just say Manchester. It makes it a lot easier. Grew up passionate about the game of football. Was a unsuccessful athlete. So kind of like most people who are an unsuccessful athlete, they generally seem to seep into the sport world. And I grew a passion for sports science during my time at college at Liverpool John Moores University. And I was fortunate enough to work under some esteemed professors there, Professor Barry Drust, Professor Warren Gregson, Professor James Morden, who are some big hitters in the sports science field over in England. And they gave me an opportunity to do it all at Liverpool John Moores, undergrad, master's, PhD. And then it kind of led me to where I am today. I had my PhD funded by Nike. Really fun opportunity. Got to do a bunch of different research, worked in an organic research, like applied research facility in a sense with the Nike Soccer Academy, which was this like development program trying to get these 18 to 21-year-old athletes professional contracts without being attached to a league. So it was really cool in terms of we traveled around the world. We were based in the performance center for the England national team. And so I got to play with all the bells and whistles being a part of Nike. And that was something that really helped me develop my skill set as a practitioner in my early career. And then I fell in love with the States, moved out to Raleigh, North Carolina under Nate Brookerson there at NC State, who gave me the opportunity to kind of set up some sports science stuff and work with the soccer teams there and the golf team and assist with everybody else. And then I got the opportunity to move to the NBA, which there isn't many British soccer background people in the NBA, but had the opportunity to move up to Philadelphia. And now I'm currently working at the University of Pennsylvania as the head of basketball performance. So quite a interesting career development, all the soccer and football in the world. And now I'm kind of heavily embedded in the basketball realm. And that's me.
Craig, could you, I know when we last talked in Raleigh, could you enlighten some of our listeners on what your dissertation topic was and the findings? I think that would be very beneficial because it was very applied oriented.
For sure, yeah. So I did a very applied PhD. Again, this was with the Nike Academy. And when it first started to develop, funnily enough, it was kind of this topic of recovery and load in sport and how kind of one mutually affects the other. And so when I started with a master's in philosophy in that, and I was just kind of looking at like how training load can be distributed across like a soccer season, how it impacts these markers of recovery and things like readiness and sleep, and then like how nutrition potentially plays a part in that. And then it was one of those where like that was too much. So kind of the big hitters being nutrition and sleep at the time, this was kind of back in like 2012, wasn't really that readily kind of researched in the athlete population. There was a lot of research in the public domain and like insomnia and things like that. But like athlete research, there was very few papers at the time. So we decided that kind of the sleep aspect was something that's kind of untouched and been untapped. So we had to look at some like applied strategies of like, okay, how do you record sleep beyond kind of your traditional like wellness questionnaire and things like that, and what objectivity we could bring to that. So my kind of first kind of steps was looking at what devices are practical but also reliable in terms of collecting sleep in the home setting. And at the time, there was this company called Zeo, which was this wireless headband monitor. It's a single channel EEG. And for the most part, it seemed like reliable. There was a couple of validation studies against polysomnography, which is your gold standard for sleep measuring. And realistically, we couldn't do I always mess that word up. Polysomnography with athletes on a day-to-day basis, just because of how many channels, and they have to wear a cap, and it really like disrupts their sleep. So we kind of landed on using the Zeo. And then a fun story, a part of my PhD in my first year, was the company Zeo actually liquidated. So they shut down. And the only way you could get the data at the time was from their cloud-based website, which no longer existed. So I collected a season's worth of data and actually had no access to this data for a few months. And luckily for me, I managed to find somebody on Facebook, which is the power of social media in them days. That's kind of, I guess, like there was Instagram and Twitter, but Facebook was kind of your main thing. Who was a software developer for him. And so he wrote like a little bit of JavaScript code and created an app for me to actually be able to re-download my data and continue during my PhD, because a year deep in data collection, the longest kind of study that we planned for. And basically I had no data. So I was like going back to the drawing board, really sweating, thinking I'm going to have to make up a year of my PhD that I lost. And so we looked at just some very general descriptive stuff, how soccer players compare to normal population and their sleep time. Now, this is youth soccer players, 18 to 21-year-olds. They all lived in the same residencies. So kind of a easy environment to control some of the sleep factors that may be like if you lived in your individual homes and around the kind of country sort of thing, and you have to travel to practice facility, wake up early. Everyone woke up generally at the similar time, all ate breakfast together. All these like cool things that like allowed like an applied study to have these like controllable variables. And the narrative that was in the literature from the current like sleep research in athletes, and a lot came from like the Olympic Federation and Team GB, was that like athletes don't sleep great and they don't get enough sleep. And what I kind of saw was, well, actually they do get a lot of sleep, and if not like a little bit longer sleep than your general population, but they also take a longer time to kind of fall asleep. And they also will have more opportunity on certain days to stay in bed longer. So that might be why they got longer sleep. So that kind of first point of like the sleep latency, like how long it took them to fall asleep, became a bit more of an interest. And then also, okay, why are athletes sleeping longer? Is it the kind of factor of because they train more, train harder, and it's almost kind of like emptying their hourglass, and so they might need to like fill it back up. So we looked at how like training load, and by training load, we were talking GPS, kind of some external measures like total distance, high-speed running, sprint, things like that. And then internal load with heart rate, average heart rate through a session, and then TRIMP scores, how they affected the sleeping patterns at night. And we didn't really find too much over distributed across a week. The main, quite honestly, finding was that it seems to be a behavioral thing, like a choice thing, that like on game days, people choose to go to bed that little bit later. Day before a game, they choose to go to bed a little bit earlier. Off days, they sleep in bed longer. But we did see the relationship using some linear mixed models that showed that like increases in high-speed running distance generally increase the total sleep time and potentially the wake after sleep onset. Our effect size was small to trivial on that, but and then total distance also seemed to have like this inverse relationship with sleep time as well. And then the last thing that I kind of looked at, which was the final study of my thesis, was okay, we don't really have a reason why sleep latency was longer than what it was. So like a lot of like our team was averaging about 30 minutes of sleep latency, which some individuals go like, oh, that's not a lot. But generally the kind of acceptable level is about 10 to 15 minutes as normal healthy sleepers, defined by the National Sleep Federation. So we looked at like a strategy to, okay, we don't know what's influencing it, but can we create a strategy to get them to sleep, go to sleep in a shorter amount of time? So I read a bunch of research from a couple of different European colleagues, and they looked at how like thermoregulatory strategies, manipulating body temperature to basically alter your circadian rhythm, increase melatonin, and drop the core temperature, which are kind of all simultaneously related in terms of like sleep propensities, like falling asleep. So we looked at a shower strategy because the apartments that they lived in, they didn't have bathtubs. So the kind of more formal research was like foot baths or hot baths before bed. We looked at a practical shower strategy. Everybody should be able to do it. And this shower was pretty hot, 40 degrees Celsius, which I always forget what that is in Fahrenheit. I think like 105, something like that. Like it's a pretty heavy, hot shower. It's like unbearably hot maybe, but we called it bearably hot. And they had to do that for 10 minutes, about 20 minutes before bedtime. Then they had 10 minutes to go back to bed. And essentially we saw just a small effect, but on average, the sleep latency dropped by about 7 to 14 minutes. So, and it was more pronounced in the people who took longer. So there was some relatively normal sleepers within our sample as well. So that's where kind of like these averages and things like that can potentially hide the true individual response. But then that's a strategy that like everybody can do. So again, a very applied practical strategy. It was actually something I won an award with from the European Journal of Sports Science for its like use of using, we use little temperature sensors on the skin. And one of the mechanisms that we saw, the reason why that could explain why the sleep latency was reduced, was we saw these massive reductions in like the skin around like your core, like your abdominals, and then increases in the skin around your hands and feet, which generally signifies a drop in core temperature when the peripheral temperature rises. So we linked that, again, the kind of true causal pathways. It was more mechanistic in a sense, but it was a cool little applied study where we had a bunch of soccer players wearing like thermometers during sleep, whilst also wearing a sleep headband and things like that. So it was one of those where you wouldn't do that very often. We did it over, I think that one was a 3-day period. So they had 3 days where they did the strategy and 3 days where they didn't do the strategy. So we saw a decrease in that sleep latency, and then no changes in the total sleep duration. Well, I say no changes, a small change in the total sleep duration. What kind of happened was people started to wake up earlier. So also that could be related to that kind of phase increase with the circadian rhythm, that they then wake up a little earlier and they feel a little bit more fresh. Now, we didn't monitor the fresh thing. That's an anecdotal conversation, but that was in essence my PhD. And like I said, I generally talk a lot, so feel free to interrupt me if I ever say something. Sorry, I do have a question.
Yeah.
What did you guys take from that I just said in terms of the applied strategies? What were some of like your take homes? How do you think that kind of research was impactful? And I'll open that up to any of you, whoever wants to take it. But if no one wants to take it, I'm going to direct it back to Ted.
I'll go ahead and start. Sleep for me has been something that's like a lifelong journey to explore how to do it better. I think high school, I was a decent sleeper. College, not very good at all. I think it cost me some recovery. I think it cost me some performance. Sleep latency, the amount of time it takes to go to sleep, it used to take me forever. I now do certain routines to be able to get to sleep. So for me as a former coach, I always try to apply whatever new strategies or new testing, new training with myself first. Being a former athlete, I thought I would be a good test subject. So for me, when you were speaking about the different variables related to sleep, it's something I'm still trying to figure out. I know there are athletes that are still having issues. Some can't turn their brains off. Some it may be nutritional, like they're not consuming enough protein or carbs. It may be they were in a long there was a lot of reading that they had to do the day before, high intensity in the classroom, and it's affecting how they're sleeping. Then you talked about the training and high intensity training and duration. So there's so many variables. I don't know how. I don't think we can give a general program for sleep. It sounds like it's very individualized. So questions I was asking myself while you were talking is, how do we help each individual athlete to be able to understand what their best sleep practices should be, and just knowing how long it's taken me to get to where I'm at, where I feel like I'm a decent sleeper, maybe above average. So those are some of the thoughts that I had while you were talking.
Well, first of all, I think your research is impressive. I think it's really cool that you were able to do some really applied work there. And I suppose, I mean, like in collegiate athletics, like sleep is such an X factor. It's everyone agrees that sleep is like one of the biggest factors affecting like health and performance. But it's probably the most under managed and overlooked factor in at least this setting. I know that you work in collegiate athletics now. I have been for quite some time. And it's just, you know, I was at a conference last week and I asked the audience to do a live word cloud on what factors they felt affected health and performance the most, and sleep was the biggest word in the middle of the screen. But then again, it's we're still getting athletes out to work out at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they're assessing athlete sleep in any environment is difficult, especially in the United States. And there's a lot of controversy around it, invasion of privacy, things like that. And you know, what's the appropriateness of requiring athletes wear these monitors versus educating them and then influencing them to want to wear the monitor so you can provide feedback. And then the question of the monitor, I think you already covered that through your discussion of your PhD and everything. But I think it's just such an overlooked factor. We have to do more. And it's so difficult, and it's so difficult in our setting. So my question, like, to the group would be, what kind of intervention strategies have you seen or used yourself in like the American mainstream sports arena, being like college sport, professional sport? I know everyone here has had a lot of exposure to elite athletes, Olympic athletes, professional athletes, as well as collegiate athletes. So what are some of the best like sleep intervention strategies you've seen when it comes to trying to help the athletes get a better night?
I mean,
I think one of the points that Craig brought up, intuitively, the athlete would think, take a cold shower if I want to bring my core temperature down. And it's actually taking the hot shower is the route you really want to go. And
so there's probably one caveat to that. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there's one caveat is we did it in England, which is generally a colder country. So potentially in these like warmer environments, these kind of more exotic environments, there might be room and scope to do some cold shower stuff. I haven't really seen much research on it. There is a couple of cold tank studies done in Australia, but they did subjective sleep. But again, like that was like one of the big questions that actually came up in my PhD viva was, well, you did it in England, like maybe that strategy isn't applicable everywhere. And that's something kind of Pat touched on a little bit, is that individualization, because also there was a couple of people in my study who had negative sleep latency effects from the warm shower. So maybe we raised their temperature up too much. But continue your thought, Ted, because that was just one big one that kind of like got me.
Yeah. Well, Ernie, to your point, I think when you're dealing with college athletes, I think we're all, I think, guilty of making the assumption that these athletes are sleeping by themselves at night. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed, because I think it does impact their, their sleep habits.
The other thing I was going to say, kind of in response to your question, Ernie, was quite honestly, the number one sleep strategy, at least for me, is the athlete wanting to change their behavior and recognizing that it might be an issue. Maybe issue isn't the right word, because we can talk to them anything under the sun, but they have to apply it. So it doesn't matter like what strategy it is, in my opinion, at least. And the most successful work I've done has been on that individual level with talking around sleep. And even like monitoring sleep, like I don't necessarily need sleep monitors to maybe have these conversations. They're useful data, but sometimes also dangerous data, I think, in the wrong hands. So that's always like interesting conceptually to me, because it's like sleep education sessions, yeah, we do them, but the relative impact is probably not that great until the person themselves recognizes that sleep is a behavior that they might need to change. And that was like something I touched on a little bit in my PhD thesis, with like behavioral kind of schedules, in a sense, how that person perceives their schedule. Like, oh, it's an off day, maybe I'll stay up later, kind of thing. Like those sort of like things where, again, we can educate on it, but if it doesn't come from the individual, like they're never going to change. It doesn't matter if I put a Zeo on them, a actigraph, a first beat, whatever it is, like they're probably not going to actually improve in their measures. So I don't know what you guys think about that, like conceptually, and like again, how those like strategies that you have used might impact the athlete as well.
Something that Ted made me think of, we never actually go as far to see what they're sleeping on. We're worried about sleep, but we don't know what they're sleeping on. The mattress, is it too hot? Is it therapeutic? Is it Tempur-Pedic? Is it old? Is it out of date? Is it where, we don't do that. We don't go that far. I know I was speaking with Dr. Andrew Paul, and I know what they do. They actually go to their athletes. And so this is a professional NBA team. They go to their athletes' houses and they look at the lighting, the temperature, the bed, and they actually are involved with the purchasing of what they're sleeping on. Like, for what we want them to sleep 6 to 8 hours a day more, and 1/3 of their life, but what they're actually sleeping on is not a part of the study.
For sure. We've all been on those dorm mattresses, right? That's not the mattress we necessarily want to be spending the rest of our lives on. But yeah, like again, and a lot of that comes down to some budgetary stuff, like having been in the NBA, some of those guys sleep in probably the most comfiest bed you'll ever go in. But yeah, the environmental factors, there's only, at least from my experience, only so much you can control depending on the environment that you're in. Because to that point, the general time when I was actually doing the PhD research, we kind of had this residency dorm room, and the beds were, I'd say, average, but it probably wasn't the best with like blackout curtains. They were kind of like the old school, like what I would call my grandma's curtains kind of thing. And so like light getting in maybe too early in the morning, and things like that, which would be, again, like these little extrinsic factors where, like, when you talk to athletes around those things, all of a sudden, like, oh wow, that affects it. And it's like, yeah, like I try and generally like tell my guys, because we can't buy them pillows and things like that, as far as I'm aware, at the college level. I tell them to travel with their pillow from home, so we're not worrying about what the pillow's like at the hotel room, because they can be very hit and miss. You can have a great one, you can have a bad one, and not every one of the guys do it, but like some of them do, and they seem to have like a positive response to it. And that, again, is just like a very like simple strategy, but the other thing that I was like kind of making with that point is like also with our athletes, we don't spend all of our time in our home environment. So we're also having to find solutions and accommodations on the road, which can then be a little bit more challenging as well. So I don't know what you guys think about that aspect of things, like how we can potentially aid in that, because it goes beyond education in a sense.
Yeah, I got a question for you though, Craig. You're at an Ivy League school, so the challenges of balancing, you know, athletics and academics is a little different than most schools. And relative to this, what we're talking about with the sleep, what challenges have you had trying to manage workloads? And because when we talk about 8 hours of sleep, there's no way your athletes with their study demands are getting 8 hours. So what strategies have they tried to do? Have you tried to implement maybe more napping sessions or something like that throughout the course of a day?
I mean, it's tough. Just the way like the academic schedule and the athletic schedule works, like even getting a nap in would be quite hard for these kids because they're kind of in school like 9 till 4 generally is most hours. So there's a couple of individuals that I've worked at that wanted to improve sleep. One in particular was getting about 4 hours a night. Kind of felt like that was normal. And I was kind of like, well, do you nap? No. Well, we're going to have to find time for you to nap because, again, there's a bit of research out there with kind of memory reconsolidation and stuff like that. So you're doing all this studying, but potentially not remembering because you're not sleeping as well. So that's one of the big challenges I would say is that there's a lot of academic stress, particularly kind of going into like finals and midterms and things like that. But one of the positive things of working with an Ivy League athlete is some of these people are smarter than I am, and they're undergrad students. So, like me being able to articulate potentially a higher level of some of the scientific evidence, and the fact that they come armed with questions. So, like, there's some very inquisitive individuals that I get to work with on a day-to-day basis. So, it actually makes these conversations kind of like almost like you're at a conference or something like that, where you're like kind of speaking to them with like that little bit more scientific tone. Whereas I've worked in environments in the past where you've had to kind of go the more layman's route and kind of make analogies. And I still use those things, but I feel like they're more receptive to that information. And I don't know if it's just like a biased thing because like I've only experienced those athletes, but like they seem to want to delve into their own like kind of studies and things like that, which again can be dangerous if you're not kind of guided through the literature. You can go on Google and read anything these days, right? And so it definitely makes my life a little easier in that aspect. But yeah, like the stuff like napping in an ideal sense, we'd be able to nap, but we typically practice like in the evenings. So we do that with the viewpoint of, okay, can they sleep in later in the morning? So kind of their first port of call is to go to class. So get the academic stress out of the way. You're not worried about, oh, I have to write this paper, stuff like that. You get enough sleep, hopefully during the night. Now we're not doing any formalized monitoring of that. I work with both the basketball team, so I work with an athlete number that I'm able to have conversations and hey, you look a little tired. How's things? Hey, if you got an exam coming up. So I can kind of do that more like what we talk about in the field, like an organic readiness questionnaire, like the conversation questionnaire. I'm sure like Pat, you probably experienced this with working with football. Like you can't have 150 conversations or how many athletes you have on your team. So you might need a different line of defense, like the traditional readiness questionnaire or whatever you use. For me, I can get enough time in the day to be able to like send off a text if I need to, or athletes know to kind of come and talk to me if they want to. So that's been kind of like my strategy with that. We've done a bunch of stuff like talking about kind of mattress toppers for those guys who do live in dorms. So you can kind of purchase a relatively good topper for pretty cheap. And yeah, generally speaking, that hasn't been a financial challenge for anybody so far. So just little things like that where they can just kind of incorporate into their own environment has been my experience. It's super cool being able to work with Ivy League kids, if I'm being honest. But yeah, Pat, what about, I want to hear your opinions on that, because kind of like I can have like those conversations on a day-to-day basis, and obviously you'd be working with a lot more athletes, and I've had experience working with a lot more athletes. Like, what are your kind of thought processes on some of that stuff?
I think where we had the most success is when we educate them and then also give them autonomy. And so allowing them to do their own research and come back to us with questions. And then encouraging them to try different methods and then see what works for them and then share that with their teammates and then come back and share it with us. And then we would share what they share with us with the rest of the team. And that seems to, and we did that with training, with lifting, with recovery, with cooking at home, anything that they did well and it worked for them, we encouraged them to share that with us. But we did that, we initiated that with education, not being afraid of if they tried something, they would fail, or if they tried something and it didn't work for them, or if they tried something and they didn't get sleep at all that night, like it was just a total failure. We didn't let that discourage us from educating them and then giving them more feedback and more options and encouraging them to try other methods. I think that worked well in a larger setting, and recognizing those that did it and did it well and shared. And when you can pull those athletes up front and say, hey, I'm really proud of John and Joe, and they did a really good job. They tried something, it worked, or they tried something, it didn't work, and they tried again. And you encourage that and you recognize that in front of the team, then others go, oh, I want to be recognized. I want to see if it works for me. And you keep doing that. And the next thing you know, it has impacted more people rather than just giving one blanket way of doing something or not doing it at all because of the fear that if someone does try it, it may not work.
Sure.
Yeah. I want to know what does Ernie think about that?
I'm just writing down a lot of notes and I'm not sure what I think about it. Like going back to interventions in this setting, while we were talking, I pulled up some data that I've collected from athletes. And I got some interesting comments from athletes on reasons why they, factors that affect them or prevent them from getting a better night of sleep. And so I kind of want to read some of those, if that's okay with all of you.
Oh, for sure. I want to hear these. I've got a few that I could give you as well.
Yeah. So I want to read some of these. And so the athletes filled out the athlete sleep behavior questionnaire, and then we gave them some additional questions. And the question was like, in your opinion, what could best help you improve your personal sleep quantity and quality? And one athlete said, not as many early mornings, or at least have early mornings every other day so we can catch up on good sleep in the intermediate days. One of them, good answer, staying off electronics an hour prior to bed. Another one said, not having to wake up at 5 a.m. for 6 o'clock workouts 4 times a week. Another one, right answer, sacrifice and go to bed earlier. And then, and I think probably one of the best ones I came across was just, and Craig, I think you touched upon it, like with the Ivy League students, but our schedule is so demanding that it does not allow me to get adequate sleep at night because I'm always working on things at night, like homework. And then I have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning to go to either study hall or workouts. So this particular athlete, if they don't have a 6 a.m. workout, they have study hall early. And so I really like some of those responses a lot more, but I just like hearing the athletes' opinions on things. And sometimes if we give the athletes a chance to share and it's safe for them to share, maybe we can start to affect some change. I do like how some athletes acknowledge that there's things they could do, because every athlete could probably do a few things to improve their sleep quantity and quality. And I think that's a lot of what we discussed. But I just really hate that we as practitioners have control of certain factors that affect the athletes, and that we just haven't taken steps forward in making some positive changes. So I think that we as practitioners can take a hard look in the mirror and how we manage athletes and how that could affect their sleep or their health and performance, and stop maintaining the status quo, because that's how we've always done it, and start to look at a better way. And at the same time, taking advantage of opportunities to educate those athletes. So those are just my thoughts. But beyond sleep, though, are there other factors like that, like these big rocks in like our space, like when we work with athletes, that maybe we're overlooking, big rocks that affect athlete health and performance, and that maybe we're overlooking or not taking full advantage of what we know about it to properly manage athlete health and actually ultimately maximize their performance?
I can take it. I think one of the things, moving a little bit out of the recovery space and kind of more to the training space. I don't know if we necessarily do a terrible job at it, but kind of Pat said it, like educating around like performance factors as well as like the recovery factors. I think we kind of go all in on recovery and modalities and things like that. Because we know that it's important for adaptations after exercise. But then how well are we explaining our training programs and things like that? How well do we explain some of the performance monitoring tests? And like a paper that was done by John Bartlett and Barry Drust, kind of about like athlete touch points and things like that. Like a lot of conversations that I've had is kind of like, okay, we're not robots. We're not individuals who like, you have to take all of these different scores. And admittedly, I was somebody at fault at Nike, where we tested readiness and HRV in the mornings. They wore sleep monitors at night. They did heart rate GPS. They were doing force plate jumping. They were doing VBT. Like the list continues, if you get my drift. And so all of a sudden, it's like, at what point does it stop being about the testing and more about the person? And so I had a couple like offhanded comments with my athletes at Penn of like, oh, what does the data say? You know, like, what does the science say? And that'll be in response to like, maybe I've changed something within the training block, or maybe we're going through a deload. And so even though it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek question, it gives me an opportunity to pull the group together and just be like, hey, this is like the reason why for this, a great question from one of my athletes, right? And so I think that if we like look at it like that, understanding of like, they don't have to understand it from the physiological adaptation response level, but just kind of that general headline understanding of this is the reason why you're doing this sort of thing. Like I'll give like a more reps sets example in a sense, with like we would do a lot of like trap bar jumping in season, and the previous coach was more used to doing like clean variations. We didn't do many clean variations because I felt like I needed to get enough time with the athletes to do a bit more teachable moments and how like a pull is performed and things like that. I didn't really like how technically we were executing it, and that's no disrespect to the previous coach or anything like that. It just didn't fit within my model of where I wanted them to be in season. So I had the opportunity to like just pull people around and pull up like an iPad and just show a few videos and like, this is what my expectations are. Here's a little bit of information on research why trap bar jumps might be beneficial to basketball jumping performance. And all of a sudden now I've created that kind of like feedback loop where there's them teachable moments and sessions. And I think sometimes, without going too far away, is like we get this disconnect where it's like it all has to be research. And sure, we have to have evidence-based practice in a sense, but like not every conversation has to be, this is what the science says. And that's why my athletes kind of do, what does the science say, as a question back to me, as that little dig, if you know what I mean. So again, I think for me that is one of the bigger factors where we don't have to go into like 2-hour sessions of talking about our programming and things like that. But feeding in the little educational moments, because for me, the athletes aren't going to be working with me for the rest of their lives. Like at the college level, 4 years, we don't have fifth year grad students at Penn. So I've got a maximum of 4 years to give them enough tools in their toolbox to walk away from me and then go on to do whatever they want to do in life, whether it's pursuing a career in athletics or whether it's in their normal day-to-day life. And my kind of job is like, okay, can they take away enough education where they think, oh, Craig taught me that kind of thing, or I learned that at Penn. So that's kind of where I think, like, applying like VBT, we do a lot of VBT work. I have to educate around it, because one is the intent of everything, and that is the easy one to probably get across. But then the deeper meaning of why we're doing some of these things has been one of the things that I've tried to constantly reiterate with my guys. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any experience of some of those other side things that kind of, for me, are away from recovery modalities and that education, and more like the performance talk in a sense.
I think a lot of it, if you look at all the physiological factors you're trying to address. So some athletes, they're plenty strong enough. They may not have enough, say, strength, endurance, and so forth, and try to explain to them, what areas that they may need to. Sometimes they gravitate towards their strength and ignore their weaknesses, and try to explain to them why some of the things that might be a weakness needs to be brought up, so it's not as much of a weakness. And if we do a whole profile on that particular athlete, and some of it could be related to injuries too, if they have a history of say hamstring injuries, or they're coming off an ACL. So a lot of the the program could be related to really for health purposes that ultimately affect their performance. But it's trying to find those buttons that connects to that athlete. How about you, Pat? The guy that just loves benching, but maybe his pulls weren't where they should be.
Are you talking about me back in the day? That's what it sounds like. I've seen a lot over a couple of decades being a strength and conditioning coach, and now overseeing strength and conditioning. And I've seen it come full circle maybe a few times. So I've seen where there's testing and evaluation that's done so meticulously, like to the smallest detail, and then some of it automated, some of it very manual in terms of how the data is collected. I don't know if any of it is as important as getting your athletes to believe in you as a coach. Whether you test or don't test, if you collect data or don't collect data, or how you collect it, or if you involve sports scientists, if your athletes believe in you because you believe in them, and you believe in your own program, and you can coach your own program, they're going to follow. They're going to believe that their coach is the best. They want to believe that. Many times we give them reasons to not believe that, more because they really want to believe in their strength and conditioning, sports performance coach, sports scientists. They want to believe they're surrounded by the best. They're trying to be the best, and they want to be surrounded by the best. That's why they chose to come to that university, college, or wherever it might be. So I don't know if I have the exact answer you're looking for. I just think that, there's a story. I'll share it really quick. Dave Redding, who was the head strength coach at Missouri at one point, and then he was the strength coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe he was finished up maybe with Green Bay, Ted?
Yes.
And he was asked to go to a high school in the Kansas City area and evaluate the program. And he looked up on the board and saw the attendance log and told the high school coach, said, "Is that the attendance board?" Said, "Yes, that's it." He said, "All of these athletes show up all of these days?" "Yes." He said, "There's no need for us to meet anymore. Let's go get something to eat." And the coach was, "Well, you haven't heard my program. Those athletes show up every day to this weight room. That's all that I need to know. You're successful. Let's go eat." And I think that message should get shared more often, because we really complicate things so much. If you are a coach that creates an environment where your athletes want to be around and want to be coached, you've won. You've done a great job. That's it.
I mean, I love that message. And yeah, it's kind of one of those, it's like, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. And Ernie, I want you to kind of answer the question, but I kind of want to put a bit of the question additionally on it, if I can, for you. Do you think that like we've gone too far down the rabbit hole with applied sports science in this aspect of kind of like thinking about performance and recovery and all those spaces? And do you think that we're kind of like now pulling back kind of as we've gone too deep with kind of technology and things like that, where we're collecting more data than we've ever collected in the past 20 years? Or I'll kind of actually just leave it there. I'll hear your opinion.
Some have. Yeah, some have. Not everybody has. So some haven't even like they won't even go near the rabbit hole, right? Like they stay away from that hole. So but then some they're like nowhere to be found. So yeah, I'd say we as practitioners, we still have everything across the board. I'm sure you do at your place of work. We definitely do here. When I'm hearing this, it's just fascinating to me. So it seems like everyone agrees on sleep. And then you said, what does the science say? Right. So are the things we're doing supported? Are we evaluating, auditing? Are they supported by evidence? And then Pat, so we have the PhD in sports science and we have the PhD in men's performance, and he's on the other end. It's just like belief. Right. So we have like the science or the evidence, and then we have the belief. And then one of the things that my answer to that question too, like these big rocks on things that could help maximize health and performance, would be just time on task. Meaning that like, because we have a lot of control of the schedules for athletes and the things we ask them to do, is like, I just don't know if I don't know if we always need to train or practice as long as we do, because there's probably a more time efficient way to get the same outcome. And then sometimes we keep athletes going from place to place, and there's a lot of dead time and small bits of time in between one responsibility and another. And sometimes it's hard to use that time for anything else. So I think that just time would be one of my big answers. Learning how to work together as a group and a high performance team to say, okay, like the athlete's going to come in, and what's the best possible thing we can do with them in the next hour, from everything, sports medicine, strength conditioning, nutrition. But a lot of times what happens is it's like, no, the athlete has to come and do nutrition. No, the athlete has to go and do their therapy or their prehab in the training room, because that can't happen in the weight room. We'll modify the workout in the weight room, but they have to go to the training room for rehab. It can't be merged together and stuff. So I think like time, that would be mine. So there's 4 factors here, because we all agree on sleep. There's evidence, there's belief. I say time. And then Ted is going to round this out with the 5th factor. And then just imagine if all 5 of those factors were mastered and fully at play at all times, like what would be happening to our athletes' health and performance. So Ted, what's the fifth factor?
The 5th factor?
Yeah.
Boy. I would say the 5th factor would be they'd have to have you is having great support from the coaching staff, that they're completely aligned with what you're saying. And I think that makes everything move, smoothly. So I think everybody's point is great. And I think what distinguishes sometimes, good programs from average is the alignment from the actual sports coaches with the messaging that you're giving your athletes.
So sleep, we'd all perform better. Coaches, support staff, athletes, evidence, we all have a better application if it's supported by evidence. Belief, we're better off if we believe in what we're doing. Time, and finally support. So just total buy-in and united front across the board, top to bottom, side to side, athlete to staff, staff to staff, staff to coach, all the way around.
So put that in the best practices document, put our names on it, submit it, and let's get this out there.
Let's
I
do.
mean, for sure. Yeah, like sometimes I often think about organizations, right? And some like staffs, like yourselves, where like from an outsider perspective, you kind of look at it as like it's that well-oiled kind of machine. And it's not necessarily that you've got the smartest and brightest potentially or the best practitioners in the world, but it's kind of how you all collectively work together. So Ted's answer of kind of like that support of the coach, I think kind of goes even beyond just the coach, but like everybody in the organization, administration for the college level, GMs and things like that. Like those teams that have that seem to be the ones that like are successful in a sense. And again, it might not be that they're doing the best science in some aspects, but maybe they are, like if it's working, it's working. And just one thing that kind of like, I think it was time that kind of inspired me is something I often challenge like other coaches is like, imagine if microdosing was introduced in the sport coaches world rather than the strength and conditioning world. Like what would that then look like in terms of could a sport coach get something done, a practice in 30 minutes? Like it's never probably going to happen, but touching on those different skills and aspects and stuff like that. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's always something that I'm just like, imagine if that existed. Like we wouldn't be talking about long practices and there's too much going on. We'd be more so going like, oh, damn, these guys have got it like locked in.
Dr. Whitworth Turner. I love that. And I think we should end before we go down that, because that may be an entire another 1 hour podcast.
Put that out to the audience. They can answer.
They can, yes.
Like email. Like let's put that out
yes.
to the audience. Microdosing for sport coaches.
Oh my gosh! All right, Ted, can you wrap this one up, because I feel like we're just now getting rolling, so we better stop right now.
Yeah. Hey, Craig, could you share with our listeners some book recommendations?
Book recommendations. Anybody in the basketball world, basketball mechanics, my friend, colleague, one of my top guys, Adam Pettaway, like his book is kind of that bridge between science, biomechanics, and then the actual kind of sport movement type of world. My director, Corey Waltz, Penn, he actually gave me a book that I've just been reading on my most recent trip, which is Tuesdays with Maury. I suggest everybody gives that book a read because it's not a sciencey book. It's not like scientific text or a how-to guide, but there's everybody kind of like likes the leadership books and things like that. But this is kind of more conceptual thinking. And it's a book that has really like started turning my gears. They would be my top two that I can think of off the top of my head. My other one is a statistics textbook that I'm now forgetting the name of because it's that complex, but the author is Gelman, and it's kind of Bayesian statistics. I'm forgetting the name of it, and I haven't got it in front of me right now because it's on my iPad, but I'm a little bit of a nerd and read statistics stuff, so I'm not sure if anybody wants to jump at those recommendations.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you for your time. This has gone by really fast. So fascinating conversation. Dr. Ted, Dr. Ernie, Dr. Craig, thank you so much. This has been a great podcast. I appreciate your time.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.